Hey, g'day. It's Buck here from Queer Pagan Men Australia, and I'm really excited to be interviewing G'day Palmer. G'day is a writer, a teacher, and a witch with over a decade's worth of experience. He teaches both nationally and internationally on many different forms of the craft, including possessionary work, ocular work, and many other aspects. Anyway, I'll leave it to him to tell you a bit more about himself. So, welcome, G'day Palmer.
Thank you, Buck. Um, so I guess I would begin with that I am quite drawn to the animistic and ecstatic and transgressive aspects of folk or traditional witchcraft. I was very fortunate to be raised in an animistic and polytheistic magic wielding family
Mm-hmm.
with stories that were not just memories but living. So stories or living memory of my grandmother being possessed or my sister being possessed by our ancestors. Shrines lit up with incense and flowers for the Hindu gods, the gods of my father, and also his ancestral deities and spirits connected to the volcano that his village is in Bali, which is an active volcano. So I grew up with and still practice and still emphasize oracular and possessory work in my craft. And I have been practicing what I would call witchcraft since I was 11. I
Wow.
consciously began practicing when I was 11. So it's nearly been 20 years. I turn 30 next year. Um, and I am completely kind of obsessed and devoted to witchcraft and to spirit work, to strategy, to devotion, to sorceress will in synergy with my spirit familiars. And I am also quite committed to the traditions, the formal traditions that I am privy to or initiated in. The primary ones being Wildwood and Reclaiming, which both are peopled by many, many, many queer people.
Well, yes, exactly. So, I guess on that point, can you tell us a little bit about your journey as a queer person and exploring the craft, and a little bit about your experiences in that, and particularly how that's transformed and changed over time?
Mm.
I know Queer Pagan Men. Originally, this whole event really started from a conversation you and I had
Mm.
back in 2011 over the
Mm.
idea of bringing queer pagans together. So I know it is something that's deep in your heart as well as mine.
Mm.
So can
Mm.
you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I probably knew that I was a homosexual or queer when I was probably 12. My awareness of my witchery and my awareness of my queerdom was very connected. Historically, they are connected too. And I came out when I was 14 years old. Um, and I never the kind of witchcraft that I gravitated to even as a young child. Like I grew up in Toowoomba, which for people who don't know is kind of like a country town in Queensland in Australia, and very conservative, very Christian. There weren't many books or bookstores that I could go to access witchcraft. So I went to the library and read all the occult books there. So the first books I read were very not the books the beginning witch would read. Maybe that's what started my nerdiness.
Yeah.
They were very historical, folky. There was actually quite a bit of Dorian Valiente. There was not, there was no Silver Raven Wolf. There was no Starhawk, who has also influenced me. No Scott Cunningham. I didn't read those books until I was in my early 20s because I thought I had to after I was practicing the craft. So I wasn't aware that queer witches or queerness in paganism or witchcraft was odd. And then I came into contact with some iterations of some forms of British traditional Wicca that did have, not just them either, but did have some kind of lore or magic that may be misinterpreted to mean that people who have non-binary gender experience or who are trans or who are homosexual may not be able to work that magic. That I want to enter a caveat there. I have many friends in those traditions who absolutely do not practice or interpret that law that way. But I did come across those attitudes, and those attitudes had kind of eked out into the rest of the neo-pagan culture, which is very heavily influenced by Wicca. And so there was this notion that being gay or queer or trans was somehow not cognate with being able to practice the craft, which seemed ridiculous and incoherent to me. So I just kind of didn't go that way ever. I just continued to practice the kind of spirit-led, very wild, very much connected to listening to the spirits. I read a great deal. I'm a voracious reader, but I never wanted to go to the traditions that I felt like I had to compromise parts of myself for, like even just the idea of masculinity and femininity as poles, which like the idea of polarity magic just does not arouse me, does not flick my switch or anything like that. So I gravitated towards my own kind of emergent witchcraft, which built and built and built until I moved away from Toowoomba the year after I graduated high school, and I met with a bunch of other queer witches. And four queer male-ish witches got together, and we founded a coven in early 2006 called Coven of the Wildwood after 3 or 4 months of doing a lot of deep spirit work, a lot of trance, a lot of contacting powers and spirits in the landscape that we call the Wildwood, which would then inform our coven. And our coven was pretty fucking queer. Like the 4 people who started it were queer male fucking homosexuals. And we then opened that coven to others and began training in our particular style. We did not acknowledge it as a tradition. We had no need to. And then in 2008, a second coven branched and moved to England, and we had to face the reality that our style was very distinct to what we could see around us, and certainly wasn't Wiccan derived, and we never identified that way, and we were not British traditional Wicca, obviously. And so we were like, well, that seems to be the mainstream discourse. We had some narrative and understanding of what traditional craft was, but it wasn't until I then encountered self-identified traditional witches when I first went to the States in 2010, and then it was reflected back to me, and I was like, oh, that's what we are. We're a form of that. And even though in some reifications or in some sodalities of traditional craft, there is actually quite a bit of genderedness that can be seen to be backwards, you'd say. For the most part, there are forms of traditional craft like the Anderson Fairy tradition, and the Clan of Tubal-Cain, and Arayan craft, which is based out of Tasmania, that I've also had influence with and involvement with. That there is room for many genders and queer mystery. So that was kind of like, that has been, since the foundation and initiation of that first Wildwood Coven, that has been like over a decade of experience of meeting people who have really corroborated and confirmed that there are many forms of the craft that still thrive, and that there are many forms of the craft that actually invite and enshrine queer mysteries.
That's really cool. It's you have been very fortunate, I guess, to have that. It's a rather unique experience, obviously. But I guess part of that is being able to follow the truth of your calling for each of those paths. It's allowed that experience. I guess that's also part of what I'm hoping we can bring to Roots and Bones, is for that opportunity for people to get to experience beyond what they see in the large majority of books and popular knowing of the craft as being a binary fertility based only option. So you're going to be presenting a workshop on Dionysus, drawing from elements of Dionysus. Can you tell us a little bit about what to expect and why this workshop?
So I've been in an active, conscious relationship with that god since high school, since probably year 11. And he came in pretty soon after Persephone came in, and I have been a student of the Orphic mysteries since then. Persephone has a central role in those mysteries. In those mysteries, she is considered to be the mother of Dionysus. So I felt like, because she was my soul goddess, the goddess of my heart, that I needed to know Dionysus. And so I studied and continue to study the Orphic hymns. They're very influential on my devotional practice. And Dionysus is a god who no one can ever pin down. For that reason alone, we can use the kind of modern or postmodern understanding of queer to signify that. That Dionysus is always the foreign god. Dionysus is always the god over there. Dionysus is the god who comes. Dionysus is two-faced. Dionysus is man-womanly. Dionysus is Bacchic and roaring and loud and liberating and initiatory and healing, and Sabbatic. Like a lot of the medieval witchcraft iconography relating to the Sabbath is so clearly rooted and anchored in Dionysian revels. Dionysian revels were banned in several city-states in what we now call Greece. Also in Rome, there was a strong societal disagreement and kind of what would you call that, prejudice towards those rites, because they were liberating for women, and they also were orgiastic. Not that that didn't exist in other traditions and cultures inside of what we now call Greece or Rome, or Italy, sorry, but the idea of the Roman Empire. But Dionysus is a mysterious, witchy as fuck, ecstatic, and I would say queer god. Dionysus shapeshifts, Dionysus skin tones. You can never pin down Dionysus. So the reason I thought and felt to bring that into Roots and Bones is because it was the most obvious to me when I meditated on it, when I reflected on it. It's one of my most passionate deity relationships. And I have also run several workshops both here and in Turtle Island or North America to do with Dionysus, to do with queer men or males relating to that god and what that can do for us in our emancipation, in our liberation, in our solidarity, in our sovereignty, in our sexual reintegration and healing from internalized patriarchy, from internalized misogyny, from internalized homophobia, and how we can, through that cathartic initiatory current that Dionysus brings, achieve gnosis. And what I mean by gnosis is not just like flash of insight or knowing that we use that term for, but I also mean kind of capital G gnosis, like this spiritual mystical idea that we can achieve union and knowledge of our own daemons, our God souls, our deep souls, which I use that word for. And we can do that with Dionysus because Dionysus is both a god of masks and a god of masks dropping away. So if one can hold both, and that paradox is a sacred mystery, one can be anything and nothing. And that to me is the very definition of queer. So that's why I'm bringing that.
Amen.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Look, I've been fortunate enough to have been in one of those workshops previously with you, and that work was very important for me, not only obviously as a Dionysian, but as a queer man, what I got out of that, and also what I felt I was able to be empowered and bring to community from that. I really got a lot, and I'm really excited that you're bringing that again and exploring that further. So thank you. So in preparation for this workshop, how does one prepare? What would you feel is the best way that our attendees can approach this and as best they can for this?
Yeah, look, I imagine that the people who will turn up at this amazing phenomenon that you are weaving together will be people who are already practiced in their traditions or their non-traditions, their style of magic. And if not, I at least hope they can ground and center. So if you're listening to this, please start researching and asking your magical friends how to do that well, because that is an essential magical skill. And the other thing I would say is Yes, always research. Research as much as you can, and do not let your research overwhelm you to the point where it's only intellectual, where you're too afraid that you'll do something wrong because it's not completely apparently historical, that it will actually stop you from having a lived connection to the being or to the mystery. These mysteries are ever reviving. The gods aren't useless symbols that require particular things to happen to achieve connection with them. The gods are real. If you yearn towards them enough, if you're filled with enough longing or even just enough curiosity, they will have enough longing and enough curiosity to meet you too, at least once. And then you can cultivate that connection if you feel it's correct for you at that time. Sometimes it's not correct at the time, and sometimes it happens later. Certainly that was true for me in the beginning with Dionysus. Remember, Dionysus has many aspects. Do not be fooled. Do not assume that Dionysus is a drunken god all the time. Do not assume that Dionysus is raving mad all the time. In his myths, he was actually healed from his madness. So he carries madness, and he carries the healing of that. He carries being torn apart, and he carries wholeness. There are so many aspects of Dionysus. So remember and hold paradox. Like if you can practice holding paradox, which you can do through grounding, like grounding into the earth and the stars, that's holding paradox.
Yeah.
So doing that, and if you're really into shrines or altars, you might choose to, with your like book-based research and your kind of listening meditative research or trance research, weaving those two together is going to make, in my opinion and my experience, the strongest connection. And then out of the kind of the left brain and the right brain, if you will, if that works for you, you can create an altar or a shrine of traditional symbols. Perhaps like maybe you might put peacock feathers there, or maybe you might put a pine cone. Maybe you might, if you drink or are okay with it, maybe you'll put red wine, maybe you'll put vine, maybe you'll put oak, goat's horns, bull's horns, snakes, symbols. You could create a very simple shrine. You could create a very complex shrine, and you could just, be with that shrine. Sometimes just the act of creating a shrine is enough. And then sometimes we layer it even more by turning up to it daily or regularly enough that we're feeding the connection. And that can be quite a powerful way to prepare for anything that has to do with a specific spirit or a deity.
Yeah, wonderful. That's great advice. Thank you. So if people wanted to find out a little bit more about yourself and the work that you offer, where's the best place or places that people can hunt you down?
Yeah, so I guess the best place would be my website, which is gedeparma.com, gedeparma.com. And then you can access, like I have several like interviews or even clips from my workshops or things like that uploaded to YouTube. And I have a Facebook page that is going to get better, I promise. I'm enlisting help there. But basically the way is the aforementioned website.
Cool. Wonderful. Well, that'll be listed below anyway.
Yeah.
So thank you very, very much, Gede, for your time. And we do look forward to seeing you at Roots and Bones in January.
Thank you, Buck.
Thank you. Catch you later.